Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. Today, I am joined by John Endres. John, how are you doing?
All good, thanks, Nicholas.
Very good myself. Much appreciating the slightly warmer weather up here in Joburg, and I'm also joined today by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you?
Hi, Nicholas. Very cold today. Well, not as cold as yesterday, but still bad enough.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit rough out there, but Monday was truly grim for much of the country, as far as I understand. But anyway, let us get into the news of today, and I think let's start off by talking about the swirling vortex of chaos that is the MK party. So anyone who's kind of been following the news will see that MK keeps sort of, apart from issuing these like really over the top media statements. I mean, we read out one a couple of weeks ago. They've also been racked by an enormous amount of internal turmoil. It's very difficult to tell precisely what is going on inside there, though, as I think the party is filled with a lot of rumors and backstabbing and maneuvering. But the most recent development that we talked about actually on the show was that the Secretary General of the party, Arthur Zwane, announced that he was resigning at the beginning of July, only for the media to be told by Zuma that no, he had been fired for mismanagement. However, Zuma is now saying that he's rejecting the resignation of Arthur Zwane, who was only in the position of Secretary General of MK for 2 weeks, and reinstating him because there was a need to I think capacitate human capital or something in an organization. I think was the excuse they gave. Strengthen internal capital, that was the phrase. Which leads one to the sort of bizarre circumstance where people are getting fired and then rehired within weeks of each other, and it doesn't seem like there's any clear organizational structure or anything functioning entirely correctly. We do know they've at least appointed a chief whip of their caucus in Parliament, which is of course John Endres, the impeached judge. But John, what do you make of what's going on in the MK party? It seems to be a never-ending story of chaos and destruction.
Well, if we were conspiracy-minded, we might think that MK is doing this on purpose because they're presenting a moving target, which is much harder to hit. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think it is management by the voice of one person, which is Jacob Zuma, calling the shots. And as he capriciously changes his mind, so the structure of the party changes to follow his whims. And that's going to be a problem over time. I think if the official opposition, as it is now in Parliament, wishes to sustain that role and build a future for itself, it will need to become far more structured than it is at the moment. At the moment, it is really chaotic. And I don't think we've seen much sign so far of a regularization or institutionalization within MK. They still seem to be flying very much by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, Terence, there's this sort of interesting space that the new opposition have kind of fallen into, the EFF and MK, is that they haven't, I think, really been able to come up with something like a coherent strategy. MK is so chaotic that, and my favorite example of this we've already talked about on the show before, but was where they just quite simply weren't able to organize a meeting with the IFP to discuss a coalition in KZN, which is one of the reasons why they got locked out of power there. But even the EFF, which is certainly much more stable internally than MK, seems to be in a bit of a doldrums. I get the idea. There's been a lot of attacks along sort of trying to racialize the government of national unity, claim that it's the DA are the puppet masters, the white puppet masters of these race traitors in the ANC. But broadly speaking, it doesn't seem like they've really, I think, managed to work out a proper way to take on the new dispensation. What do you make of that, Terence?
I think there's a few things going on here. I think on the one hand, there was a sense, I think, for many in the EFF that the ANC would never be able to conclude a deal with the DA. I think that was why they were quite lackadaisical about it. Let this farce play out, and then they'll come crawling to us. And also, I think you saw an element of panic when it looked like that deal was going to get across the line, where they were saying, "Oh, well, they're willing to, talk in terms of Ramaphosa staying, and they've got no hard lines. So that's the one thing. I think also that for MK, you have a party that has very much been a vehicle for Zuma's personality, and I think that has proven disruptive to the EFF's plans, because Zuma personally remains a very popular figure, and I think a lot of their growth potential was swallowed up by that. Zuma, though, remember when he was president, he kind of ruled by chaos. He was shifting ministers and shifting directors general and whatever, and that was kind of the way he retained power. And I think it's pretty much the way he deals with any organization that he is in charge of. He doesn't want people becoming institutionalized. So he remains the fulcrum around which everything turns. I think that suits his purpose, because it's really, I think, fundamentally about his well-being and whether he can stay out of prison. Yeah, I think also but I think for political parties across the board, it's now become a new reality. Well, I think we're probably going to talk in a bit about the DA. After 30 years, the antecedents now have to not be the big opposition party in the room. It's very tough for them. Look, but as far as the racialized nature goes, I think that's fundamentally what the tool that the EFF believes it can wield, because that's a tool that the ANC forged. For 30 years, central to its narrative was that the DA was white privilege and counter-revolution and alien interlopers, etc., etc. Now all of a sudden they are sharing a governance perch. However they may want to spin that this is the government of national unity. I think that's deeply unpopular within for many within the ANC, because the ANC itself has made that option toxic. So that's the most logical thing for the EFF to hammer on.
So, John, I think an interesting question to consider is what exactly is going to be the future relationship between the EFF and MK. Right now, they're close allies, and honestly, in terms of their sort of messaging and policy proposals, there isn't really that much difference. And with MK being, firstly, completely chaotic internally, and secondly, also being so strongly based around the personality and presence of Jacob Zuma, one does have to wonder whether the party will be long for this world. If Jacob Zuma is too old to be in politics or passes away, or alternatively, the party is just not able to kind of organize a proper structure to campaign with. Does the EFF try to absorb them? What do you think happens from here on out? I mean, it is worth noting that despite MK doing pretty well in KZN, winning a majority of the vote in a majority of municipalities, I believe they've only won one by-election in the entire country so far, which speaks, I think, to the party's sort of on-the-ground weakness in some ways, despite the fact that it has made such an impact in its first election.
And so I think one of the things that's happening is that these sudden shifts in personnel are actually a method of demonstrating power and exercising power. So how do you show that you're the person in charge? Well, you do it by shifting people out of their positions, putting them back in, taking them out again, moving them around, and that shows that you are in charge. And I think that's what Zuma is doing. The other thing he's doing is that he's creating a feeling of uncertainty within the party. So anyone could be next on the firing line. Anybody could be promoted next, but everybody is dependent on Zuma and his decisions. So it's a very personalized party. And as you explained, that represents a risk to it, because when that person, for whatever reason, drops out, then what is left? And then there's not much left. So what is the future of MK once Zuma goes? I'm not sure that they will go to that the voters will go to the EFF. There is a close alignment, I think, in the manifestos, but I don't think most MK voters have read the manifesto. I think they switched to MK because they trust Zuma. They like him. They think he's going to take care of them, and maybe mix in a good dollop of Zulu nationalism, and that's the recipe. So many of those voters, I think, might gravitate to the IFP if they want to continue along the Zulu nationalist line. Some of them will go back to the ANC, and others will go to other parties. So I think one of the functions that has been played by MK in this election is a kind of nutcracker function, where it sort of breaks this close link between ANC voters and the ANC. That's been broken now by MK. And once it is broken, then it's not going to be reestablished in the same way. So all of those voters are not going to go back to the ANC, even when MK is not an option anymore. They will start considering other alternatives as well. So I think it introduces a great element of dynamism into the politics, and how it plays out now really depends, I think, on the longevity of Zuma himself, and also on whether he will be able to institutionalize and build some structures in MK, which at the moment he does not seem to be doing.
Any final thoughts, Terence, before we move on?
No, I think that covers it fairly well. Yeah, I suspect that what you're dealing with an MK is I've said this before, classically populist party, and this very much in the Latin American model, personality driven, grievance driven, not particularly ideological. But you showed in the way that you suddenly found Dr. Hlophe going into Parliament that their lists are very are a very unstable commodity. But I think also that the ANC is banking on MK imploding eventually. Maybe Zuma's not a young man, so maybe they just have to hold out a number of years, and they will, and hopefully they can get a good part of that constituency back, take themselves back over 50%, and they can continue on as before, which I think is also perhaps what it also has implications for how seriously they take the current governing arrangement.
Right, let's move on to our next story, and this is about the relationship between the DA and the ANC in particular, but it's also about how our parliament is going to work, and that is who got what in the parliament committee, portfolio committee chairperson. So each minister has a counterpart in parliament who is a portfolio chairperson. That chairperson is supposed to lead the oversight into anything the minister does, and also ensure that legislation is properly considered and discussed in Parliament before it goes to the floor of the National Assembly. So there was, I think, some speculation that the DA might get a little bit more, quite a few number of these chairpersonships as a kind of payment for them not taking that many ministerial positions. But once again, the ANC has managed to secure itself a pretty sweet deal, getting 25 out of 33 chairmanships. The DA got 5 out of 33. And then the Freedom Front Plus, Rise Mzansi, and Build One South Africa each got 1. So the DA got water and sanitation, public service and administration, police, social development, sports, arts, and culture. The Freedom Front Plus got the Auditor General. Rise Mzansi got public accounts, which is where Songezo Zibi is going to be. Build One SA got appropriations, where they put Musi Maimane. And otherwise, it seems like it's pretty much business as normal in cabinet. In Parliament, the ANC does also have a number of portfolios where it controls the minister, the deputy minister, and the portfolio chairperson. So I'm thinking minerals and petroleum resources is an example of that. Higher education, I think, is another, as well as defense. So it does seem like the ANC has been very hesitant to let go of power, even in Parliament, which has got less, direct control of how the country is actually run, and provides much more of an oversight role. I think it is. Well, firstly, let's start with this. There is one just thing I want to note is that while I think one can make a case that there hasn't been nearly as much change as the election suggested there should have been, there has still been some remarkable examples of change. And I'm thinking in this case of Ian Cameron, who not that long ago was being thrown out of a meeting hall by Bheki Cele's police and being told to shut up. And now Bheki Cele is not even in Parliament, never mind not being a minister. And Ian Cameron is the oversight chairperson in the Portfolio Committee for Police. So some things certainly have changed. But John, let me start with you. What do you make of this makeup of our parliamentary portfolio committees?
So in my view, I do think the DA got shortchanged, both in terms of the committees and also in cabinet, but I don't think it matters much. I don't think it's going to be the win that the ANC thinks it is. And the reason for this is that these DA people in these committees and from the other former opposition parties do have the ability to exercise oversight. And I think if they do this well, if they play their cards right, they are going to create quite a large disturbance within the ANC, within the establishment. It's like having a pebble in your shoe. It's sort of bothersome, and you have to do something about it. And I think that is the role that the DA is going to play, and it's going to play it well. So I'm not too fussed about them not having received their fair share of parliamentary portfolio committee chairmanships or cabinet seats. That's okay. I think they will nonetheless have an impact, and I think that if the ANC, in response to this, does not pick up its performance, then it is going to suffer the consequences in the next election. So for the DA, this is quite a good position. I think it's not bad at all. And speaking of the portfolio committee, I don't know if you saw that video clip of Ian Cameron chairing the police portfolio committee and having an interaction with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi of the EFF, which was absolutely unbelievable because it was so polite and so restrained and so courteous that it was really hard to believe. So Mr. Ndlozi sort of raised a point with the chairman very respectfully and said, as we exercise our oversight function here, we must make sure that the information supplied to us by the minister is delivered in a timeliest fashion to give us time to engage with it and not just be given to us a day in advance so that we don't have time to read it properly, which is a perfectly valid point to make. Very good point as well. And this was coming from, the radical EFF in the opposition. That was really impressive. So the way things are lining up at the moment, I'm actually quite hopeful. I think we must also be careful that we don't miss the road for the speed bumps, because as this process of governance unfolds and lawmaking in South Africa in the next 5 years, there are going to be very many speed bumps. There are going to be fights and headbutting between the ANC and the DA and the other parties. That's to be expected. But overall, the direction of travel is not bad at all at the moment. Nick.
So, Terence, I think the DA has a very interesting position here where they're kind of trying to recalibrate themselves. They're not necessarily powerful enough in government to be comfortable abandoning opposition. But at the same time, they're also not completely out of the halls of power. So we're seeing, for example, with regards to the NHI, that the DA it's described in the Daily Maverick as softening its position. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case. I guess you could make an argument it is. But originally, the DA promised to take NHI to court. And now it says that it's still definitely considering taking it to court, but it first wants to see if it can get some changes done to the National Health Insurance Scheme through the mechanism of the Government of National Unity. Now, I'm skeptical that they will be able to affect much change there, particularly because health is a portfolio that the ANC is very dominant in at the moment. But Terence, what do you make of their position? They sort of seem to be in this kind of weird place where they're trying to sort of half be in opposition and half be the government. And maybe that is the right place for them to be, but it's a tricky one.
Well, funnily enough, I remember reading something I think it was the Natal Witness in about 1996, where someone was saying that the ANC wants to be the government and also the opposition to the government. So, you would have this funny thing where, ministers would appear on picket lines to encourage strikers and that sort of thing. Now that's mellowed somewhat, but I think that as much as the ANC has aspired to hegemony, there's always a part of it that I think yearns for the day when things were so much simpler. And it was, it was in the mode of permanent revolution. That's why, they've never actually, I think, given themselves fully over to the task of running the country, but rather to, seeing this as a terrain of struggle. I think, all rather childish, but, there it is. I think it speaks to their political culture. Now, the DA, I think, is now going to confront that very similar set of circumstances. I think it's going to find it incredibly difficult. So yes, I think that, but on the NHI, I take a somewhat I take what I think is quite a nuanced position. I think, first of all, yes, their opportunities for influence have changed from what they were 6 months ago. So you have to sort of recalibrate yourself. We'll see whether they do have effective influence, but also I think that they're in a situation where there's not really a hell of a lot well, we're in a situation where there's still a great deal of mistrust, and I think certain ideologically inclined issues are essentially off the table. NHI is one of them. You're not going to turn that ship around, but perhaps what they could do is they could say, well, we disagree about the form and the end goal, but we can both agree that getting public health facilities working is in everyone's interest. So maybe we can cooperate on that. And, maybe down the line we will be in a situation where, touch wood, and maybe this is hopelessly naive, so that governance in South Africa is working to a point where a large chunk of the middle class and the medical establishment would actually go for some version of a national health insurance system. I'm saying this is down the road, but maybe if we could find one another and develop enough confidence, that is possible. And then maybe the terms of those engagements can start to change. Like I've said, before you get married, you send a WhatsApp. And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on in between. And I think we're very much on, blue ticking at the moment.
So I suspect how this is. Yeah, no, I think that's a good analogy. I think there's a lot to be said for how it's probably going to be a very uneven process. So you're going to find portfolios probably like minerals or health, where the differences are very big and the ANC maintains its sort of hegemonic control. You're going to find that the DA will be a lot more oppositional in those ones. But then maybe in trade and industry, if the deputy minister and Parks Tau have a good working relationship with each other, maybe there the DA will be slightly less confrontational. And so you'll have this, I suspect, a bizarre thing where on minerals you might have the DA working with the EFF to stymie the ANC, and also on health, but then on I don't know, basic education, you'll have the ANC and DA working together against MK and the EFF. It's going to be very complicated, and I think difficult to build basic narratives out of. But John, any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the first one is that the ANC had basically untrammeled control over South Africa for 30 years, was not able to exercise that very well. So now we're in a situation where things have to be negotiated. The DA is now in government with the ANC. The ANC will have to make compromises. And I think we're going to see a lot of compromises being made. I think this is not a period of government where we're going to see binary options. Like many things are not going to be either go or no go. They're going to be somewhere in between. And NHI is probably going to be one of those where you sort of keep working on it, but it doesn't fully become realized at any point. In the meantime, you fix the public health system. And a few years from now, you'll be able to have a functioning public health system alongside a world-class private healthcare system. So I think a lot of these things are not going to be as clear-cut as we might think they should be, much as you explained with the different portfolios moving at different speeds. And that's fine. I think this is a win.
Going to be interesting to see how the parties campaign at the next local government election, I think, because, while there'll be a tendency, I think, particularly by the DA to try and focus on local issues rather than drag in the national stuff, there will be a lot of discussion of how the government of national unity is going. And how that election goes for the various parties is going to be, I think, extremely important to the future of the government of national unity, and also the balance of power there. Okay, let's go on to our last story for today. And the former chairperson of VBS Bank has detailed in an affidavit after pleading guilty to various charges, criminal charges relating to corruption, theft, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, about how his arrangement with the EFF works. In his testimony, he said he met EFF leader Julius Malema and Foy Chavambu at the party's Santon penthouse during the Nkandla scandal, and VBS had been under a lot of pressure at the time because they had given the loan to Zuma to kind of legitimize Nkandla. He said he promised the party leaders that VPS would pay the EFF an initial 5 million rand and thereafter make a 1 million rand monthly donation in an effort for good PR from the EFF. He said that these payments would be made to Foy Chavambu's brother through a company owned by him, Brian Chavambu. And this would then channel the money to the EFF. So I don't think this is particularly newsworthy in the sense that, these are not really details or accusations that are new. This is exactly what the EFF's been accused of doing for a long time. But still, to see it kind of in such stark terms out the open, it also, I think, underlines, John, many questions about what agreements were reached between the EFF and various organizations over the years. I'm thinking, for example, Clicks, when the EFF had a fight with them, and then they met with Clicks' management, and then suddenly, the protests about Clicks' supposed racism stopped. And one wonders whether this is how the EFF manages, despite often not recording any donations in the official declaration forms, manages to be so well funded. What do you make of this?
I suspect that Clicks was not probably one of the sources of funding, but I think there are many other instances where it worked exactly the way you're describing. What I find, I think, most interesting about this story is that my understanding of South African politics since the election has been that we've got this new dividing line between pragmatists, if you will, on the one side, which would be the DA with sort of the more reasonable and restrained elements in the ANC working together, and on the other side of that dividing line, the more radical parties like MK and EFF. And it seems to be at the moment that those radical elements are actually they're really on the back foot. So we spoke about MK at the beginning. They've got their internal turmoil. I think they're going to battle a bit to sort of find strategic cohesion and move in a certain direction. And the EFF, I think, is going to be hurt by this. So they've seemed a bit subdued, even in the run-up to the election, also since the election. And that's actually really positive that you see these radical elements not being very successful with their attempts at disruption and at radicalization. So I think this bodes well. I think there should be deserved public outrage at the revelations from this affidavit, which I think spans 268 pages. It's quite long, quite detailed. It implicates some leading ANC politicians as well. I think Zweli Mkhize gets named for having received allegedly a 2 million rand bribe. So I think that this is going to have some impact, and it is going to put the more radical elements on the back foot, and that's good for South Africa's democracy.
In response to this, Terence, Julius Malema has basically said something along the lines of, well, if I'm guilty, arrest me, bro. Which is, I think, him essentially daring the powers that be to actually act on this. And I think there's been a lot of hesitation within law enforcement and the upper echelons of the ANC to crack down on things that, let's just say, delve too deeply into the financial dealings of the EFF, even though I suspect they might be able to find something there. In part because I think they always wanted to have it as a potential tool to use in negotiations with the EFF, but also because they're scared of making the EFF into, I don't know, political martyrs or something like that. What do you make of the, are we ever going to see charges brought against the EFF's leadership for their alleged involvement here? What do you think, Terence?
Well, I think that's the Mail and Guardian, the Daily Maverick, actually published a selection of articles about this, which are well worth reading. In fact, I interviewed Pauli van Beek a couple of years ago about this issue, and it was this is, as I think the editorial said, this is Robin Hood in reverse. This is stealing from some of the country's poorest people to, just finance opulence for others. And also, if you look into the details, just how crude it all was. I mean, this wasn't like it was literally a case of just emptying out the financial reserves and doling them out. And then also the complicity of accounting firms. It was shocking. Do I think we'll ever see any consequences? I'd like to say yes, but I doubt it. I think that there's a certain immunity that goes with being too senior, and possibly because of how can I put this delicately? I think that so much of our governance and administration is filtered through a political lens. That you just really don't want to upset that apple cart. And I think there's also many people in the ANC who would be wary of upsetting this apple cart, because I think there's a lot of skeletons buried in a lot of graveyards, and a lot of people know where they are. I understand this was an issue with Jackie Selebi, that he had a lot of dirt on people. And this goes right back to the days in exile when the ANC was thoroughly penetrated by the then government, and a lot of people were involved. Were effectively double agents. So no. Also, I think to make that sort of case, you need to devote a lot of resources. Forensic ability. Forensic skills. All while there are crowds assembled outside your offices, baying for your blood, doxing you, where your children go to school. It just becomes a very, very difficult one that I think a lot of people don't want to touch. And I suspect that this is why this will never have a satisfactory resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it is also worth remembering that many of VBS's clients, particularly in its early days, were Stockville people, people running Stockvilles, people running burial societies, that kind of thing. In other words, many of the poorest people in our society. Basically, the looting of VBS Bank and the destruction of the savings held within hurt very specifically poor old gogos from Limpopo. So
Yeah.
this is such a dagger in the heart of the EFF's entire image of themselves as, supposedly fighting for poor Black South Africans, when in reality, this scandal suggests quite the opposite. John, any final thoughts before we close up for today?
Yeah, just a quick one. Again, I think that the presence of former opposition parties in cabinet, around the cabinet table, in portfolio committees, is going to serve as a somewhat inhibiting influence on these kinds of things. In the past, if you were in the ANC cabinet or the NEC, you'd be surrounded by people who had skeletons in their closet. In the future, you'll be surrounded by some people, or you'll have some people in your midst who don't have those skeletons, and that's going to make it a bit more uncomfortable for you to engage on quite the same level.
Yep.
Seem to have lost John there.
I'm back now. Yes.
Yeah, you were saying, sorry.
Just to make that point, that I think the presence of former opposition parties will have an inhibiting effect on these kinds of corruption.
Indeed. Okay, that is all the time we have for today. We hope you found the show interesting, and we will be back on Monday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Cheers, everyone.